So a lot of you probably know that I am a storyteller, and I'm actually also, well, actually I have my degree in applied linguistics, but I did my degree, advanced degree, in using storytelling to teach English to speakers of other languages. And I have studied folklore at the University of Oslo, and I've studied it also at the University of Minnesota. So this is something I know a lot about. It's kind of almost hard for me to try to narrow it down, something that you can get a PhD in if you want to, you know, and to kind of get you interested in thinking about it for 1 hour. But when I use this, when I say the word folklore, folk tales, what are some of the things that you've been learning about that you know already? There are legends. For sure there are legends. That's a kind of folklore. Folklore is like a big subject matter, like saying when you have English, you know, it's composed of a lot of different things. You're just scratching your neck? I guess that's allowed. Anything else? That's all you know? Aren't you in advanced English class? That all you know is that there are legends? There's got to be more. Come on. There's myths, too. Thank you very much. Legends, myths. Fables. What? And they're folk tales, which is, you know, so legends, myths, fables, folk tales. There's actually, if you were to get a PhD in it, you get to study fun things like how rumors are spread, or how gossip starts, or graffiti, or you get to celebrate, you know, study how people, folk life, how people celebrate various kinds of customs, you know, and how that gets passed on, and so on and so forth. It's really a lot of stuff. And the thing that I've always focused in on is folk tales. Fables, you know, are short stories and with animals in them. They're different from other kinds of stories because the animal isn't just an animal, it stands for something. So a lion stands for royalty or kingliness, and the sheep stands for meekness, and a fox stands for cleverness, and, you know, everything stands for something. And they always have a moral at the end. So even though they're very short, little kids never get them. They're not really very good for little kids, you know, even though a lot of people think so because they're short. What's the difference between a myth and a folk tale?
Myth, like, explains how something happened.
Sometimes.
Long time ago.
Yeah, sometimes, but not always. There's one big difference. Got to have that on the clear. Myths, and I didn't get to, I brought some myths that I'm working on, but myths always have gods in them. They can seem a lot like these other stories, but they always, and they do often explain how things got to be, but they have gods. So Zeus, or, you know, Hermes, or, you know, Hercules, or any one of those guys. And if you're in the Norse myths, I know you learned about Odin, the head of the gods. The day Wednesday comes from Odin, because Odin's old name was Woden. So Wednesday is Woden's day. Thursday is Thor's day. So that's named after Thor, the thunder god, that's my next manuscript. I'm working on stories of Thor, the thunder god. Very good stories, oh, the best. But Thursday and Friday is named after another god, the chief of the lesser god named Frey. So it's Frey's day, Friday. It became in time. All the other words we got from the Vikings were things like murder, blood, axe, slaughter, you know, pillage, plunder, all the stuff, because you know what those guys are like. But actually, all of those words that sound like that, slaughter, kill, all that, those are all Viking words. Isn't that terrible? So that's the big difference between myths and folktales, is they're very similar, but these have gods. What about a legend? That's where you were at. It's supposed to have happened a long time ago, and it explains how something got to be the way it was. It's supposed to be true. So what I wanted to talk to you about today was, I'm an expert, of course, in Norwegian and Scandinavian folklore because I'm a native of Norway. I'm still not a U.S. citizen. So that's my area of expertise. And I wanted to tell you something about the types of the folk tales. And you might have learned about some of them And I'll give you some examples. So folk tales, just like folklore can be broken down, folk tales can be broken down in different types. And in the days before television, before radio, before going to the movies or plays or theater, what you guys do for entertainment, people sat around telling stories. So they were, in a way, the movies or the television before, books and before all of those things were invented, all right? So a lot of people, especially adults, for some reason think that all folk tales are meant for little kids. And that's, can I use the word baloney? Okay, that's a bunch of baloney. Absolutely not true. Folk tales were meant for everybody, kind of the way television is meant for everybody. But just as in the case is for television, there were certain kinds of stories that you would tell just when all the little kids were also awake, like after school, right? The shows that are on after school are very different from the shows that are on at, say, 9 or 10 o'clock at night. You all agree? Yeah, it's exactly the same with folk tales. And so there's some, you may think that this belongs to the ancient world, but actually it's not that different. So the tales that were told when the little kids were still born or still awake, were, first of all, a kind of story which were called accumulative. And a lot of you know those stories. Have you heard the story about the pancake? Or the house that Jack built? Yeah, where, what happens is you have the addition of one detail after another. So it doesn't have as much of a storyline, but the fun of it is kind of the addition of details. A story that I often tell for very little kids, which, they just love it, because you know how little kids always say, I'm going to eat you up? They always like stuff that has to do with food. Is a story called The Fat Cat. And I would normally only tell this is the kind of television or kind of story that's really good for 2 to 5 or 2 to 6 years of age. And I'll just sort of very briefly tell you parts of that story so you can get an idea of it. It's a story I love to tell called The Fat Cat, so that you have a clear picture in your head. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, there was an old woman who had a cat. Well, one day she made herself a nice big pot of gruel. And she was about to sit down to eat the gruel. She realized, she didn't have any cream or sugar. It was going to taste terrible. So she said to her cat, I'm going to run over to the neighbors. I'm going to get cream or sugar. You stay here and don't get close to the gruel. So she left. And as soon as she was out the door, the cat walked up to the gruel, sniffed it, and thought, oh, that smells so good. And he thought, she'll never be able to tell. So she went, and he took a little lick. It was so tasty, so he bent down and he took another. And before he knew it, he had eaten up all the gruel, but he was still hungry, so he ate the pot as well. Well, just then the old woman walked in the door, and she looked at her cat, and she said, my little cat, you are very fat. What have you been eating? And the cat said, I ate the gruel and the pot, and now I'm gonna eat you. If you're a little kid, you would have been squealing by now, okay? You gotta get into it. But he was still hungry, so he walked on out the house and down the road until he met Skalinkalot. And Skalinkalot said, my little cat, you are very fat. What have you been eating? And the cat said, I ate the gruel and the pot and the old woman too, and now I'm gonna eat you. And he ate Skalinkalot, but he was still hungry. So he walked on down the road and down the road he went until he met Skahottentot. And Skahottentot looked at this fat cat and said, my little cat, you are so fat. What have you been eating? And the cat said, if you were little, you'd go, I ate the gruel and the pot and the old woman too and Skalinkalot, and now I'm going to eat you. And he ate up Skahottentot, but can you believe it? He was still hungry. So he waddled on down the road he went until he met 5 birds in a flock. And the 5 birds said, my little cat, you are so fat, what have you been eating? And the cat said, and you know the drill, I ate the gruel and the pot and the old woman too. Skalinkin lot, ska hot and tot, and no, I'm gonna eat you. And he ate the 5 birds in the flock. So it keeps on going. Next he meets 7 girls dancing, the old lady with the pink parasol, the parson with a crooked staff. Each time the thing gets longer and longer and longer, right? Finally he meets a woodcutter, and the woodcutter says, my little cat, you are so fat, what have you been eating? And the cat said, I ate the gruel and the pot and the old woman too, skalinkin lot, ska hot and tot, 5 birds in the flock, 7 girls dancing, the old woman with the pink parasol, the parson with a crooked staff, and now I'm gonna eat you. Oh no, you are not, said the woodcutter. And he got out his axe and he sliced a great big hole in the cat's tummy, and out jumped the parson with a crooked staff, the old woman with a pink parasol, 7 girls dancing, 5 birds in the flock, ska hot and tot, skalinkin lot, and the woman jumped up and grabbed her pot and ran home as fast as she could go. So the woodcutter took the cat, stitched up his stomach, and put a great big Band-Aid on it, and brought him home to live. And that night the cat had such a bad stomachache, he promised himself he would never eat that much again, ever. And he never did. And don't you do that either. Og snipp, snapp, snute, her eventyret ute, which is Norwegian and means snip, snap, snout. This tale is told out, which you're going to have to learn. Snip, snip, snapp, snapp, snute, her eventyret ute. See, that's, you know, when your parents say to you, what did you learn in school today, dear? You can say, I learned Norwegian.